there's another group that's important at this time, and this is Persia, which was located in what is now Iran. And Persians were very advanced politically. They had a very strong government, and they were the creators of something called the Royal Road. This was used, basically it was a route for messengers to travel more quickly so that they could communicate faster. So that was a really important thing, because at this time you didn't have a quick way to just call somebody up or send a message. Someone had to take that message to whoever you were trying to communicate with. So the Persians had two big rulers that were famous. One is Darius. Darius is considered the most successful ruler of Persia. He's the one who really expanded the Persian Empire. And then his son is Xerxes. And Xerxes continues basically the legacy that his father Darius started by trying to invade Greece. So these are enemies of the Greeks, and that's why we're bringing them up, because they're going to have a major role to play here. So this is just a quick map to show you where the Royal Road was located. So it goes all the way from this area of Greece, like near Ephesus, Sardis, through Cappadocia, down through Assyria and Babylonia, all the way to the city of Susa. So it connects essentially Persia and Greece. The Greeks go to war with Persia because of Darius and Xerxes' sort of determination to conquer Greece. And this lasts for quite a while. So first of all, you have the Battle of Marathon. This started because he had captured Greek cities, and those Greek citizens in those cities fought back, and they were revolting against his rule after he had conquered them. So he's getting revenge on them because they won't do what he wants. So he goes after Athens. And the Athenians, even though they're greatly outnumbered by the Persians, they managed to win this battle at Marathon. So that is a huge win, and that shows him, okay, this is serious, they're not just going to give up. So then, in 486 BCE, Darius' son Xerxes takes over, and his goal is to finish the job his dad started by taking over Greece. So the next big battle is at Thermopylae. And here you have Persian troops of 180,000 different troops coming in, and thousands of ships trying to attack at Thermopylae. And the Greeks only have 7,000 men, a fraction of that, and they only have 200 vessels, 200 ships. So they are, again, greatly outnumbered, but they managed to hold the Persians off for 2 days. And this is where the movie 300 comes from, is that there's a group of Spartans, of about 300 Spartans in this battle, who are especially brave and instrumental in holding the Persians off. But unfortunately, there's someone within the Greek army that betrays them, and they release information to the Persians about some secret passage through the mountains to get into Thermopylae. And the Persians take that, and they're able to come in and surround the Greeks and win. But it's not over. There's another battle at Salamis, and in this battle, the Persian fleet gets destroyed. So in 479 BCE, there's a major naval battle, and it wrecks the Persian fleet, which is excellent for the Greeks. So later that year, the Greeks are able to get to Persia on land and defeat them. And this ends what we call the Greco-Persian Wars. Greco being Greece, Persian obviously the Persians. So Greece wins, which is great for them, but as you're going to see in this class, as we talk about different wars, every time there's a war, just because you win doesn't mean that everything's all hunky-dory at the end. Because oftentimes, the winner has to recover because they've lost a lot of buildings and people, and things have been wrecked. So most of Greece, by the end of these wars, is just in ruins because it's been destroyed by the battles. Okay, now I want to talk to you a little bit about Greek culture. One of the first things that is very well known about Greece is their religion, and their religion is polytheistic. So again, polytheism means they believe in many gods. We won't go too far into detail on this, but you are welcome to deep dive into this because Greek mythology is very fascinating, and you probably know a little bit about this, especially if you're a Percy Jackson fan. There are 12 chief gods in Greek religion, and they live on what's called Mount Olympus. Zeus is the father of the gods. Then you have different gods for all kinds of different things. So, for example, Athena is the goddess of wisdom, Apollo is the god of sun and poetry, Ares is the god of war. So each god or goddess has a special role, and depending on what a person needed in their life, they would go to a different god or goddess. If, a soldier is about to go into a battle and they know they're outnumbered, they might pray to Ares. So it just depends, but there are different gods and goddesses for all kinds of things. And everybody wants the gods to look on them favorably. So they're always doing these festivals, these rituals to try to make the gods and goddesses happy. One famous thing about Greek religion is called the Oracle of Delphi. Basically, an oracle gives you visions of the future, and you would go to the temple to hear the gods speak. And so the oracle was in charge of communicating with the gods. And they did this by burning leaves and inhaling them to hear from the gods. And this is how they would answer questions. They did this for political leaders, they did this for everybody in Greece. So, very interesting mystical element of Greek society. Let's talk a little bit about Greek philosophy. So, kind of related, but a little bit different, is just the way of thinking. So, Greeks had a love of wisdom. They admired wisdom. They thought that was desirable. And so, a lot of really wise thinkers come out of ancient Greece. So, for example, Pythagoras, who you've heard of in your math classes, was a Greek philosopher. And then there are a few others that we'll talk about. First is a small group called the Sophists. The Sophists were basically people who were teachers that would travel around and teach people. And their focus was to emphasize persuasive speaking. So they taught people how to speak persuasively and to convince an audience to choose a side on an issue. And they also believed that there was no absolute right or wrong, that everything was there's no black and white to right or wrong. Everything's gray, in the gray area in the middle. And so that made room for a lot of debate. And then there are 3 really famous Greek philosophers that have had a huge influence on the way people think today, especially in our part of the world. So those are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And they're all connected. So first, Socrates came up with something called the Socratic method. This is actually something that your teachers use all the time. And the idea is to use a question-answer format to help students or pupils to find their own answers to a question. So it's not about me telling you what to think. It's me helping you learn how to think on your own. The thing about Socrates, and this makes sense that he teaches that way, but he questioned authority, and that kind of gets him into some trouble, and he ends up getting into trouble with the government. And Socrates was the teacher of another important philosopher named Plato. Plato is known for a piece of writing that he published called The Republic. He is also known for questioning reality itself. So what is actual reality? How do we know that anything is real? That was a big question he pondered. And he also looked at things through the lens of a perspective called idealism. So he chose to look at things by trying to imagine how they ought to be and not necessarily just looking at how they are. So instead of being a realist, he's an idealist, meaning he looks at how could things be better, how should they be, not how are they actually. And then last but not least is Aristotle. And Aristotle attended a school that was founded by Plato. And Aristotle kind of zooms in a little bit. He thinks that if you can examine an object, you can perceive its form. So he wants to look at the specific to understand the abstract, the wider lens. And so he starts by analyzing and classifying things through observing and investigating. So he emphasizes really observing things and paying close attention to things, whereas these other philosophers were more big picture guys. Some other things that ancient Greece is known for is their history and their art. They're known for history because they had some really solid historians that did a good job of keeping records of everything. So two of those are Herodotus. Herodotus wrote a history of the Persian Wars that we talked about. And then Thucydides wrote about another war we'll talk about called the Peloponnesian War. Greeks are also probably most famous for their art. Their art has influenced art in Europe for many, many years. It presents people as their ideal selves. So that's why when you look at Greek sculptures like this one here, this guy's ripped. Like most people weren't this muscly. They didn't all have abs and great biceps and look like this all the time. But most Greek sculptors wanted to depict humanity in its best form, in the best way they could. You see a lot of the beauty standards from that time in the way that they sculpted and painted people. So mostly sculpture. Also architecture was a big thing in Greece. We still use a lot of Greek style architecture today. And a lot of that comes from those temples to the gods and goddesses that we talked about before. Okay, now let's talk about the Peloponnesian War. After the Persian Wars, Greece became split into Athens and Sparta, and these two city-states were so different that eventually they fight against each other because they just can't stand each other's way of life. And so this war starts around 431 BCE. And the Athenians decide to stay put and just fortify their city because they have really great strong walls around their city, and they know that if they try to go to Sparta, that the Spartans are going to beat them on land. So their best bet is to try to hope that they can just fortify themselves against an attack by the Spartans. So during the second year of the war, there is a plague that breaks out in Athens, and it wipes out 1/3 out of the population. So they take a serious hit by this sickness that comes through. But they managed to keep on keeping on for 25 more years, and it isn't until then that they suffer another major blow, and that is when their fleet gets destroyed by the Spartans. And within a year of that, the Athenians are really, really struggling and they surrender. So if you think about it, boil it down, Peloponnesian War, Athens versus Sparta. Sparta wins, big surprise, they're the military ones. But as a result of this, over the next 66 years, all these city-states in Greece are fighting to have control of Greece. Now, another civilization that comes into the picture here is Macedonia. Philip II builds up a really powerful army for the Macedonians, and he starts expanding his territory by conquering the territories around him. And if you look at our map here, you can see that Greece is just to the south of Macedonia. So he's a neighbor of the Greeks. They probably have interacted, and they know each other. And so he's going to have to interact with Greece. His biggest rival is the Persians. So what he does is he knows that Persia and Greece don't get along, and he convinces Greece to help him fight against their common enemy, Persia. And this helps all those fighting city-states in Greece to unite, because now they're all going to join the Macedonians and go kick out the Persians. So they're, of course, cool with this because they don't like Persia. So along comes Alexander the Great. He is from Macedonia, and it's kind of similar to what we saw in Persia, where we had Darius was the father who wanted to conquer Greece, and his son Xerxes takes over when he dies and tries to finish that goal. And Alexander does the same for Philip II. So Philip is his father. Philip wants to go fight the Persians, and so when he dies, Alexander takes over and helps to finish Dad's job, basically. So he takes 37,000 men into Asia Minor to attack the Persians, and within 1 year he's freed Ionia from the Persians, and he's already moving into India. So he's making great progress, and he's really gained a name for himself as a military leader. Alexander also had a cultural legacy on top of his military legacy. And what we mean by this is that Alexander, while being a Macedonian, he was really into Greek culture. He thought it was really cool. He was a huge fan. And so he wanted his people to adopt Greek culture their way of life. And so as he expanded his territory and took over different areas, he brought that Greek culture with him, this imitation. So it's not Greek because he isn't Greek, he's Macedonian. So we would call this Hellenism or Hellenistic culture, because Hellenistic is just culture that's basically like Greece, but it's not technically Greek. So it's kind of confusing, but if you hear the word Hellenism or Hellenistic, it just means to imitate the Greeks. And so Alexander spreads Hellenism all throughout Mesopotamia and all the lands that he's conquering. So what does Hellenistic culture look like? First of all, there's a big emphasis on science. So you get some really important scientific thinkers from this ancient period. One is Aristarchus, who comes up with the heliocentric model. We will come back to this idea, but to give you a quick overview, helio means the sun, and centric means centered. So this is just a model of looking at what they believed the universe was like. They believed that the sun was at the center of the universe and everything revolved around it, which, we know is correct now, but at the time they didn't have a way to prove that. This was just a theory. Then you have Eratosthenes, who came up with a way to measure the Earth's circumference. And you also get Archimedes, and Archimedes is a little bit more well known.
Well, we'll just see.
And you will, Archimedes, you will.
Because he developed the concept of pi. And he was a geometry guy. He studied the geometry of spheres and cylinders as well. So all of this leads to the spread of Greek culture all over the world, and people start adopting it. So that's why we still see Greek culture around us. Like, we've seen sculptures like the ones you saw on those slides. We've seen architecture like the ones we see in the background here. You can see how it's touched even modern history everywhere you look.